Yet another school shooting has led Biden to once again call for gun safety measures. Meanwhile, the GOP leaders offer thoughts, prayers, and conspiracies. Trump went down to Waco to attack Alvin Bragg and conjure images of cult leader and alleged pedophile David Koresh. Is this the desperate last act of a cornered rat, or should we be worried? Then we'll turn to a new study that shows Americans are abandoning our defining values. What will that mean for our country and our lives? And finally, we'll check in with the folks over at Fox News to get the latest on how the Dominion lawsuit is sowing chaos in America's favorite right-wing cable network. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason. Well, the obvious place to start here is the shooting in Nashville. And, obviously it's personal. I was a school principal in Nashville, not too far from where this school was. And what we know as of right now is that a heavily armed assailant entered a Christian school in Nashville on Monday morning and fatally shot 3 children and 3 staff members before the assailant was shot and killed by police. And there's footage out there of just how quickly police responded and how that all went down. And according to initial findings from an investigator, the shooter was a former student who is now 28 years old. And the school in question, this is Covenant School, which is a Christian private school. They serve about 200 students from preschool to 6th grade. And the former student entered the building through a side door, armed with 2 assault-style rifles and a handgun, and went from floor to floor shooting people. Jason, where do we start? I don't know. I know you're probably sick of these, just the same conversation over and over and over again. It's like pushing the boulder up the hill. But, what do we talk about here? What do we talk about that's different than every time you and I get together to talk about this kind of stuff?
So I've been dreading, knowing that we were going to have to come on and talk about this because and I don't think you have to have PTSD. I don't think this is unique to me. I don't think you have to have my background to feel the way I feel. I think this is true for a lot of Americans, is that whenever this happens, man, it really affects me and my mental health for days. And I have a really hard time processing it. Now, probably a lot of that has to do with the fact that I have a 9-year-old son who goes to school, and so you go through that stuff of well, it didn't happen to my family. I don't know these people. Why is it affecting? Well, because it's really upsetting. And so I guess where I would start is just reminding anybody listening that it's okay if this really bothers you, because it really bothers me every single time, and it'll affect me for days. And I guess it should. But on the other hand, I saw where I was doom scrolling about this yesterday, and I saw where somebody said, hey, it's okay to step away from this news for a little bit. And I think that's important to remember too. So I just want to say that before we get into not the politics of it, but the policy of it, because I guess that's what has me full of angst and everything, is this feeling of I think that so many of us have on the gun safety side of things of why can't we get this done? Because every time you see this happen, you just feel personally like you failed. I mean, I'm on the board of Giffords, and I'm not saying that makes me deep into the fight, but it makes me in the fight. And man, it's just really, really, really frustrating. So I don't know. Yeah. That's me rambling, man.
Yeah, I think obviously we have a unique problem here in this country. We've been through the data before. We're not going to go through it now. I think most people listening to this podcast know this. And there's this meme that's going around on the right about, how much, how cars kill more people than guns, and how we don't ban cars or whatever. But you need a car. You need a car to go from, point A to point B,
Mm-hmm.
You don't need your gun. Your gun isn't going to take you to school. It's not going to take you to work. You don't need it. We don't need guns. That's the difference. Right. But so Biden stepped in here. He has long been about the assault weapon ban. In 1994, he negotiated a 10-year ban as part of the broader crime bill. He gets a lot of shit for that crime bill, but we can all agree that this assault weapon ban was good. And it was temporary. Obviously,
I mean, you can just look at the data, right? I mean, the way that these shootings have gone up since the assault weapon ban went away.
Right. Right. And I think most people, like most reasonable people, agree that you shouldn't be able to have military style or, armor piercing bullets or, guns that can spray. That's not for hunting. That's not even for self-defense. Like, it's not like an army's coming after you. When people talk about self-defense, they're talking about a home intruder, right? You don't need something that could spit out 100 bullets in a minute, right? Like, the people who have these types of weapons are generally cosplaying, or in cases like this, trying to do something, that we can all agree we want to stop, Well,
and the other piece of it is that I feel like nobody ever talks about is that there's a lot of people just like guns. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's like, it's so sometimes, it's cosplay. Sometimes it's, nefarious. Very rarely is it nefarious, but a lot of, I feel like I say this every episode. I live here in the middle of the country. I have a lot of friends who own a lot of guns. And this is guns are a big issue for them. I end up talking about this issue with them a lot. None of them are trying to do anything nefarious with their guns. A lot of them will say, I'm not really defending my home with an AR-15, but they like having it, and I'm not defending them. I'm just saying at the end of that's what's, I think, so freaking frustrating to me about this is that, like, a lot of this is that it's two things. One, with individuals and with voters, it's, we don't acknowledge how much people are just like, I just like guns. I like having an AR-15. I like doing these things. I'm into it. It's a hobby, right? Okay. But that's not really what's stopping us from getting things done. Because the truth is that if you talk to the majority of those people, they think there ought to be reasonable restrictions on that stuff. What's really stopping us is that the gun industry is a huge and wealthy lobby. And I don't think I'm breaking any news here. But like, when we talk about what should change and what we should focus on, I think we have to start with the fact, and you've heard me say this before, that we've actually won the debate. If you look at the numbers, the vast majority of Americans want common sense gun safety measures. But the problem is we haven't won the legislative battle because of because of a million things, because of gerrymandering, because of voting rights, and because of the Electoral College and all this stuff, right? Because of the makeup of the Senate. But we can't mistake the fact that we haven't accomplished what we want to accomplish with thinking we haven't persuaded enough people. I guess we haven't persuaded enough people for the structure we have, but we have won the debate. We have the majority of people. So what it had me thinking about from a messaging perspective and how we get this across to people is, I feel like we have got to center so much more of our messaging on a single change, one or two, right? Because you get people going, oh, well, you can ban assault weapons, but then do you define this as an assault weapon? Do you not? And I always come back to the fact that the gun industry, and this is what I think people should talk about when this subject comes up, is that the gun industry has a level of immunity that no other industry has in this country. So there is this thing that was signed. It's called the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Okay, it went into law in 2005. A lot of Democrats voted for it. All right, and what it does is it basically says that you can't sue a gun maker for a regular reasonable level of negligence and have 12 reasonable people, a jury and a community, sit down and say whether or not they think that this gun maker took reasonable steps to keep people who shouldn't have guns from having them. And the reason I say this is different from everybody else is because if a law like this had been in place for the tobacco companies, well, then you'd still have like everybody smoking all over the place. You wouldn't have all these laws that were paid for by tobacco companies in settlements and lawsuits where, they have to have these anti-smoking messages. You wouldn't, the NFL wouldn't have taken steps to try and make the game safer. They had to take those steps because they were sued by players because there was no law in place for that. Ford Explorers would still flip over and explode because there would have been an auto industry law like this. Like that's what's so frustrating to me about this is like, if you just repealed that law, so many of these other laws that people want, you wouldn't necessarily even need them because the gun industry would be really interested in avoiding liability by making sure that they took steps to have more smart gun technology, to require that their purchasers use gun locks, to actually do background checks on everyone regardless of where a weapon was exchanged. The gun industry would have a registry because they'd want to know who has the guns. Because if they didn't, juries would hold them accountable and say, this is a reasonable step for you to take given the danger of the product that you sell. And that's why I'm so frustrated, because it's like that one thing that we never talk about would make an enormous difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, Biden, you're talking about Biden here. He was asked today about this, and he said, basically, I've exhausted everything I could do through executive power. He's saying, look, Congress has to act. And here's a video from yesterday on this. Let's cut to this video of him talking in the wake of this tragedy.
It's just, it's sick. We're still gathering the facts of what happened and why. And we do know that as of now, there are a number of people who did not make it, including children. It's heartbreaking, a family's worst nightmare. And I want to commend the police who responded incredibly swiftly, within minutes, and the danger. We're monitoring the situation really closely, Ben, as you know. And we have to do more to stop gun violence. It's ripping our communities apart, ripping the soul of this nation, ripping at the very soul of the nation. So I call on Congress again to pass my assault weapons ban. It's about time that we begin to make some more progress, but there's more to learn. But I just wanted to send my concern and hearts out to so many parents out there.
Now, something you said, Jason, reminded me that in the midterm elections, something interesting came out of the polling. You may remember this, that exit polling was picking up initially that a sizable percentage of people going to the polls cared about crime. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm, and everybody was like, oh yeah, like this is going to be the red wave, right? All these voters being motivated by crime. And I think follow-up studies now have shown that, and sort of parsing the crosstabs, that potentially what was going on was that a lot of the people who said crime was their big concern were actually then saying, well, our solution isn't to, be in a moral panic that the right wing wants us to be in. It's actually to push for gun control. Right. Like, so a lot of these people weren't manifesting crime the way that the GOP does. And that's what I start to think about. All right, I agree on the policy front, simple policies, pick one thing, et cetera. But I also think the story we tell is really important. Like, what's the story of crime? Like, almost like we should take, like almost jujitsu, take some of this GOP, arguing about, oh, like we're in this epidemic of crime. Crime's the biggest thing in the world. And be like, well, okay, how do people commit crimes? How do people commit these violent crimes? Well, they're getting them from an iron pipeline that's sending guns to cities. And, in some cases, the suburbs are being affected by this too, which is obviously a huge constituency for us. So, yeah, like maybe that's the answer. Like we flip this debate.
Yeah, man, because I think that makes perfect sense. And I think people are scared in this country. And the Chiefs had a big Super Bowl parade, right? And like, I don't love huge crowds anyway. It's a thing about me and my background. But that said, part of why I ended up like, I did a whole thing with my family, like, oh, it's going to be cold. We're going to wait a long time. But really, man, like in my head, and this is a little bit of hypervigilance that I have from my background, but I doubt I'm the only one in Kansas City who ended up deciding not to go to the Super Bowl parade, who would probably have liked to have gone, because I was like thinking about the July 4th parades, the previous July 4th and what happened. And like, so, because when you think about the idea that guns are so plentiful, they're so easy to get, that if somebody is having a mental break, if somebody is, is somebody who shouldn't have a gun, like, it just takes them having one bad day, man, or just being one bad actor getting, and we're just so close to it all the time. And that's even if you've never been close to someone who was involved in one of these shootings, or never been close to a shooting, which at this point, like by degrees of separation, pretty much everybody has. But even if you never have, it's still nationally traumatic. And and so like I just remain so angry at the gun industry, because to me, like, we've made villains sort of across the board of the tobacco industry in this country, which I'm not saying we shouldn't have. I think that was right, and it has a lot to do with things changing. But we have this partisan divide over the gun industry, which makes no sense to me, because even if you are a person who loves guns and you like to go target shoot and you like to go hunt and you like to do all that stuff and you're a gun hobbyist and you have a huge collection, why do you have love for the companies that charge you all this money right. for these, and goes out of its way to have no regulations on it whatsoever? So, like, you know, the theme of the show is how to talk to people about it. I always, when it comes up with people, I'm like, I say, look, you're a responsible gun owner. Why are you protecting people who are not? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Right. Right. It's like saying you love cars and that you should, like, support drunk driving.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, okay.
Like, you're against seatbelts because you're a car person. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's just, and they're, you know, it's so, Diana said to me before I came upstairs here to do this show, she was like, please try not to use profanity, because she just knew the mood I was in. So I'm doing pretty good so far.
Well, this reminds me of something we talked about during, you know, I don't even remember which shooting, how many times you and I have talked about shootings over the years.
Yeah.
But, and we haven't been doing this podcast for 20 years, you know, like
right.
It's like we've probably done a dozen.
Like 2 years.
Yeah, we've probably done like a dozen of these. It probably could have done more, many more. But something I said probably a while ago is, one thing that bothers me about this debate is I'm constantly being told as a city person that I don't understand rural America, and that we city people are trying to project our values onto rural America and basically tell them how to live their life. And here's an example where it's the opposite, right? Like, we're told, like, in cities, that we can't have our own policies, whether it's DC's gun law, New York's gun law, which is now going to be overturned. We're now being told that we can't have our own policies that reflect our values, our safety, right? Like, I don't care. Like, honestly, if you're out on a farm somewhere, obviously, as we'll get to in Waco, Texas, there are certain examples where I would care what kind of guns that you have. But by and large, you're sitting in your house in a farm somewhere. I don't really care that much about what kind of guns you got there. Obviously, I don't want you to have like a shoulder fire missile or a nuclear weapon. We're all for some kind of gun control. But when you're in a city, you're so close together. When I leave my apartment in Manhattan, I'm on top of basically the amount of people in my square, like my few blocks around my apartment, is more than in a lot of towns and sometimes cities in America, right? So, and that means that the law of numbers take over, which means there's going to be crazy people on the street. There are going to be people who are having a bad day. There are going to be people who are reckless, right? And I really love the fact that I don't live in a Wild West version of New York right now where all of those people are carrying guns. Because I've grown up in New York my entire life. I've seen people wield sticks at each other. I've seen people throw punches at each other. I've seen people throw each other through glass windows. I've seen people step out in front of cars. I've seen people fall almost like into the subway tracks and people pull them out. I've seen people try to push each other into the subway tracks. Like, there's just all sorts of crazy stuff when you live in a city of 10 million people. And if you hand those people assault rifles, machine guns, or whatever, things can go bad. And that's why we tend to be very like bullish on gun control in our cities, but we're being told that we have to live by the values of rural America in our cities. And it's like the exact thing that they accuse us of doing to them.
I tell you though, I mean, I agree with you, but the thing is that like, it's not like unlimited access to guns is working out great for the middle of the country or for rural America either. I mean, like, I grew up, I grew up here, and I can, like, growing up, I never had any thought that, like, when we got into a scrape with other kids, that like somebody might have a gun. Like, it wouldn't have occurred to me, right? Like kids get into fights and stuff, and we got into, and it was like, and sometimes when you're a 12-year-old boy and you're roaming around with your buddies, like, honestly, sometimes you're probably out cruising for a fight. Like, it's part of being a 12-year-old boy, But now, like, I'm scared to death of the idea of my son doing that because, well, I wouldn't want him going out looking for fights anyway, right? But the whole dynamic has changed. Now, like, those same people who were, my counterpart 12-year-olds at that time, like, if one of them cuts me off on the road, like, obviously I'm going to try and be chill about it anyway. But, like, I'm especially going to back away from anything because I'm all the time hearing about road rage shooting. There was one here just a couple of weeks ago, right, where somebody just pulls out a gun and starts shooting, and then and then you have these laws change about castle doctrine and everything, and now it's like it is like the Wild West. It's like there's this wide interpretation as to when you can use a gun for, you know, quote unquote self-defense, and sometimes it doesn't look like self-defense at all. So it is absolutely out of hand, and it is really scary. And yeah, I mean, when you're living on top of other people, it makes no sense. It's illogical, and it is so frustrating to me because it is all based on some very powerful manufacturing companies wanting to manufacture and sell as much of their product as they possibly can. And I don't think we should have to put up with that. It's insane.
I agree. Well, one last thing worth touching on, and we don't know a whole lot. You and I were just talking before we went on this about the identity of this shooter. There's a manifesto apparently that as of this recording, we don't know what's in it. And I've seen on the internet sort of Ben Shapiro types tweeting about the trans identity of this shooter. And essentially saying, well, okay, and it happens in Tennessee where there's this huge debate over all these trans bills and all that. And they're saying, we're being told that we're bigots because we wanted all of this, whatever restrictions on trans rights or transitions and all that kind of stuff that we haven't really talked a ton about on this podcast. But there's also the drag bills and things like that, which are being mixed in with this. And I'm not exactly sure the connection. But the presumption in these tweets and these segments on cable news are that, well, here's the argument. And this is for our listeners, you're going to hear this argument, which is every time there's a mass shooting, this is what Ben Shapiro was tweeting earlier, or at least retweeting. Every time there's a mass shooting, I'm being told that it's about toxic masculinity. And now, allegedly, this shooting had to do with a trans person who may or may not have a manifesto. I have no idea. I don't think we know at the time of this recording. And I don't know what's in that manifesto, whether it has to do with being trans or not. But assume it did, for example. So he's saying, well, how come I can't talk, how come those other shootings are about toxic masculinity, but this isn't about trans people? So I want to address this argument based on the limited information we have right now, because I think you're going to hear it. Two things. One is you don't have to talk about other shootings in terms of toxic masculinity. It's generally not my way of talking either. So that's just one thing. You don't have to buy into that binary. You don't have to be on either side of that debate in that way. But two is, let's pretend like you do talk about the mass shootings in terms of toxic masculinity, or point out that there is a very clear trend of males of a certain type who do most of the mass shootings in this country. That is a clear trend. And you could describe that trend, you could describe it whatever way you want. One shooting and one person is not a trend. I'm sorry. So if you're trying to make this about the identity of the shooter, to me, it's just flimsy, right? If these people talk to you about this in your life and be like, look, let's pretend this was the most barbed manifesto ever that directly talked about Christianity being an affront, whatever, this being about being a trans person and the school abridging their trans rights. And, let's say they quote Ben Shapiro in there and Matt Walsh, et cetera. That's one person. That's not a trend. They're trying to equate this with a history of mass shootings in this country, which fall almost neatly into one bucket of a profile of person. And once again, I don't use that kind of toxic masculinity language and all that. But if one did, they have a whole body of evidence to go off of it. This is just one shooting. So I just wanted to mention that because I think people are going to hear this. I
would add to that this same group of people, they have, every time there's a mass shooting, they are desperate to accomplish their first priority, which is to run interference for the gun industry. And the key move that they've developed for that, because they've had to pivot to this move, right? Because for a long time what they did, and I still see it in my mentions after this stuff happens, but you don't see it as much from politicians because they know it's tired. The key move used to be that it is wrong for you to make political hay out of this so soon after a shooting. But at some point, people stopped putting up with that. The media stopped giving that any air, and they realized they needed something else to distract. And so that's why they go with, let's put all our energy into identifying what the motive was of the shooter, as if that really, at the end of the day, matters, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. we're going to talk in a few minutes about Trump, trying to incite people to violence and that kind of thing. And that matters. But at the end of the day, if you just stipulate that there are really, really deranged people of all sorts of political views and backgrounds in this country, so maybe it'd be best if we don't give them the weapons that I was given in the military after extensive training and qualification. You could just start with that. But then the other thing they do is they'll do things like what Rick Scott did yesterday, which is just before I even get into Rick Scott, we'll do the one that's become now a classic, which is people going on talking about why was the door unlocked. Well, we've now seen the video. The person shot their way in through locked doors, right? But whatever. Don't get into the door debate. Don't get into that stuff. Don't get into should teachers be armed. Don't get into what Rick Scott tried to do. He tried an all new move where he said, what we need to do is we need to make the death penalty automatic for a school shooter so that these monsters, I think I'm quoting this close to verbatim, understand that there's no way they'll survive something like this. Don't take the bait. Don't respond to them with, look, this shooter was there with the intent of, doing suicide by cop, basically. Don't get into saying like most of these people want to die in the act. Don't get into the death penalty doesn't work as a deterrent anyway. Forget all that. Because that's not what he wants to have that debate with you so that he's not having the debate with you about common sense gun safety measures.
Right.
That's what all of this is it's all just window dressing to take you and your mind and your eye away from the point, which is that, hey man, if there are people who are crazy and are going to do violent stuff in this country, whether they agree with whether they follow the same accounts on social media as you or the same accounts on social media as me, man, it's your kids or mine that are going to be hurt, or you or me that are going to be hurt. So maybe we should make it harder for them to get guns.
Yeah, I agree. The door lock thing just pisses me off so much as a former school principal, because it's like there's going to be a door unlocked in America in schools. Like every school in America something's going to happen. You don't close the door enough, or
it's a building full of children.
Yeah, it's just
someone's gonna. I can't. I mean, I'm not gonna dime out my kid for what he doesn't, do around the house that you would expect a person. But they leave stuff in their wake. They walk in, they drop coats. They do. They're children.
And not to like freak people out, but there are also lots of things that happen in a day outside of that school. You have to line up for the bus. You go on field trips. Like anybody who's crazy is going to find a way. The idea that like these schools have to be run like Fort Knox, and that you got to add another worry to educators, long list of worries, is that if they accidentally leave a door unlocked, they're going to be blamed by the country for a mass shooting, to me is crazy. Like absolutely crazy. And
here's what, to use your exact language, when you talk about like a military post, right? Like let's take like take Fort Liberty or, Fort Huachuca or any of these places. Yeah, they have guards, they have all these things, but you know what else they have? You're not allowed to bring guns in them. And they have schools on their posts, right? If you want to bring a gun on a military installation, including you being an active duty member of the United States military who is trained and qualified to carry a weapon, you have to register it. You have to do all sorts of things with that post in order to do that. So like, if that's good enough for the United States military, how is that not good enough for the rest of the country? It's anyway.
Let's just end this on this note. We'll keep monitoring the story, and unfortunately, I know this won't be the last time we talk about this issue. We're going to take a break and hear from our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to talk about Trump's trip down to Waco, Texas. We're also going to talk about the Fox Dominion lawsuit and some really fascinating developments there. And then we'll, of course, end with Grab an Oar and talk about how you can get involved in your community. All that and more when we come back. All right, Jason, time to get the old band back together. We've been doing these Athletic Greens ads apart, but it's really important to come together sometimes for the children, for the kids, to show them that both of us are still united on this issue.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
There's no. I was listening to another podcast that I won't name recently, and there were three hosts to this podcast, and one of them came on and was talking about how much he loved his AG1, but was saying how the other host hasn't really taken up the AG1 thing yet. And I thought, well, that is not an issue on our show. Like everybody involved with this show, every producer we've ever had, our family, like everybody,
even former skeptics. Like I remember back in the day, our producers used to make fun of us for our love of
Yeah.
AG1, and they're all converts now.
They're all
So-
on board now. Absolutely.
It's hard not to be, honestly. I take it in the morning. I just took it this morning. Sometimes I take it twice if I'm having a particularly active day. And what's cool is I, like most people, drink too much coffee. And what I've done is for my first cup of coffee, instead of the coffee, I now take AG1, and it keeps me hydrated in the morning. There's a lot of science that says that's the right way to do things. But Jason, in case people are just living under a rock, what is this stuff?
It's 1 scoop of powder mixed with water once a day, and in that 1 scoop, you're getting 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, and whole food-sourced ingredients. If you're looking for a simpler and cost-effective supplement routine, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/majority. That's athleticgreens.com/majority. Check it out.
We all know that times have been tough recently. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. These could be medical expenses, auto expenses, travel expenses, and many other things. And those expenses can pile up. They can, start at the beginning of the year and grow. And sometimes they can even just creep up on us. And that's why we love our sponsor, Dave, who could help you get your money sooner without worrying how much money you have to get through the week. It's a banking app that could help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. And with Dave, there's no interest, late fees, or credit check. So if you're in a pinch and you need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from the future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now, or go to dave.com/M54. That's dave.com/M54. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, you can go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC. All right, Jason, you and I are roughly the same age. I was 10 years old. You were probably, 12 or something when the Waco fiasco happened. I remember watching it live on television, as you probably did. It was like a few-day standoff. If you don't know anything about it, there's a great Netflix documentary that just came on board, which is incredible. That has all the footage of what happened in Waco. But essentially, it was a cult leader who was hauled up in a compound, and the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, botched a raid of sorts of this, commune type thing, and a lot of people died, and it was a horribly handled from law enforcement perspective, and a rather deranged person who was hoarding military grade weapons, many of which should be added, per our last segment, would be legal today, I'm sure, but at the time a lot of these were illegal, and it was a fiasco, and it's become a symbol of the right, apparently. And Donald Trump held not a symbol because of the fact that this cult leader was doing a lot of things wrong, including molesting children. It's a symbol of the right because of law enforcement, what law enforcement did. It's like a "don't tread on me" symbol, and Donald Trump seized on that symbol this weekend when he held a rally in Waco, Texas, where this whole thing happened. On the 30-year anniversary, we're getting old, Jason, of the branch. It's called the Branch Davidian Compound is the name of the group. And he had a whole lot of things to say, Jason, and we'll go through them, but I'll just pause there to say there's a lot to talk about here, but he made a particular move here. He basically said, hey, the government's coming after me, and they're going to come after you, and I'm going to call out Alvin Bragg, I'm going to call out the FBI, and I'm going to use this symbol of the 30-year anniversary of this tragedy to underscore a political point. It was quite stunning to see this, honestly.
Yeah, it's frightening. And, I think the question we posed at the top of the show is this him becoming more isolated? Is this sort of, like a cornered rat? Or is this scarier than that because it is, mainstreaming of this fringe sort of anti-government stuff? And I actually think it's both, because what's upsetting is, or what's scary about it is that, yeah, on the one hand, yes, Trump is pulling back into a corner, and like not long ago he was tweeting very QAnon sympathetic stuff, and then he's trying to piece together as he starts to lose a little support, he's trying to piece together really fervent support on these edges. But the reason it's scary is because these edges are becoming less of the edge, like they are, it's growing more mainstream. And so while on the one hand, yes, it is a bad sign politically for Trump that he's got to marry himself to the Branch Davidians, and that he's got to, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second, he's got to try and revise the history about January 6th and try and make heroes out of these people. The scary part is a lot of that's going to work, and it's going to become a more mainstream point of view.
Yeah, there was this moment in this documentary that it was fascinating, by the way, because there was never before seen footage. And so you hear from the ATF agents, and then you hear from people in the compound, including some of the kids who are now adults. It's really fascinating. And then there was one particular part of an interview that they interviewed a woman who was a mother at the time. And so she's one of the few adults who you can hear from now, who was an adult then and an adult now. Because the kids, it's very, like, you listen to the kids who were in this compound back in the day, and it's like they're clearly traumatized in a different kind of way than the adults, who were more like they had agency. And they interviewed this woman who was basically like, look, it was basically the Trump Fifth Avenue moment, because she had kids, this woman, and at one point she was negotiating with the hostage negotiators and let her kids go. Mm-hmm. And you'd think all these years later she'd be like, I'm so glad I let those kids go. And she basically says in the interview, it was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. And she didn't say because I was going to be separated from my kids, because she was like, I wanted them to be with me, and if we had to die for our cause, we die for our cause. I'm looking at this woman and saying, all right, Trump's onto something. There is a connection here. Trump is our modern day David Koresh. A lot of his supporters, like Koresh's supporters, believe Trump is, sent here by God. My dad says stuff like this. My dad's a Trump supporter, for new listeners. You hear a lot of evangelicals talk like this. So Trump is smart in a way. And, to make matters worse, he also mixed January 6th imagery. So there was the January 6th choir, apparently, who was singing or whatever. And there were, at a certain point while he was on stage, there was January 6th footage that was very artfully edited to make it look like the government was the ones overstepping January 6th. So this guy isn't even subtle, Jason.
There's an expression, I think it's regional to here, but I don't know, about when you church something up. Like if, somebody changes the pronunciation of their name to make it sound more highfalutin or whatever, or they'll, somebody named Willie, you'll start going by William, and they'll say, it's like, oh, you're churching that up. He's literally trying to church up an insurrection, like, right. Creating a choir. It is frightening, and it's going back to our discussion from last week. It probably is good politically for the DeSantis's of the world, but I'm not sure that makes me feel any better. It is. This is why I said, like, I think I told you before we started recording, like, I was a little worried that this would be a depressing episode just by nature of the news. And so far, that's where I am. I'm hoping we're able to
I know we've got another story after this that's also depressing. I forgot that we're even hitting it. But look, this is a bit of a nostalgia train. Like, because so much of this, I want to pull it in the direction of Waco, because I haven't talked about this in so long. So stop me if I'm going too far on this. The early 90s were a weird time. Like, I'm thinking about this, like, in a couple of years, we had OJ, we had Waco, and all these kinds of things. And
we had a generational change in that we had a baby boomer elected president who had been a child of, had been involved in the 60s, and people had a lot of weird feelings about that.
Yeah, you think about Rodney King, OJ, Waco. And what's weird as I think about these moments is that it felt like we put all that behind us. It's not like in 2002, we're having a Rodney King discussion in most parts of America, or an OJ conversation in most parts of America, or Waco, certainly. Maybe of those three, Rodney King was probably the one thing that would probably come up more often than others. we just kind of put the early 90s behind us. We're like, oh, crazy times. What I think is really interesting is that I feel like more than ever, these things are coming up. Like we are Waco now. I think America is Waco. Like we're in these moments now where like this bizarre funhouse reality we lived in the 90s, which shaped our childhood, is like now fairly mainstream in a weird way, and it's kind of refracted through our social media politics. But when I look at Waco, I kind of right-size it in my memory, like, oh yeah, we were crazy. What a crazy thing happened back then. Now to hear Trump talking about it, and also to hear like people on the right, especially the extreme right, making new meaning from that moment, it's like, oh yeah, like we're as crazy as we've ever been. You know, it's like talking to people who think OJ didn't do it. Like recently I've had these conversations with people who were like, yeah, OJ didn't do it. It was a setup. And I'm like, wow, we really are just as crazy as we were in the early 90s.
And I think it is a result, it is a product of the fact that the right wing, when you think about what it actually is, particularly right wing media, Fox News in particular, it's a nostalgia machine. That's what it is, right? Like, think about the slogan, "Make America Great Again." Really think about it. It's just mainlined nostalgia. That's all it is. And you know, everything on Fox, where we've talked about before, how it's just, you know, actors who live in Manhattan and, you know, do New York things who then go on television, act like they're filming straight from a diner in, you know, Western Pennsylvania. That's a nostalgia machine. All of it, you know, the idea of like, think of how many right-wing talking points basically begin with, you know, it used to be that, or whatever happened to, like, and that's and what that opens up is an opportunity to completely revise the history of it. Because when you just think about just people your age and my age, like, well, you know, 1993, when you say 1993, I don't think of Waco first thing. You know what I think of? I think of, oh, that was the summer of the 93 flood in Kansas City, and about my whole baseball season pretty much got rained out. So it was me and my friends just running around listening to Tom Petty and getting into trouble, right? Like, meaning even though, you know, I didn't get to play baseball that summer, it's tied to these positive memories anyway with me and my friends. And so that's what the whole Fox News machine is set up to do. That's what the entire conservative, you know, movement in America right now is set up to do, is to tie policies that we've actually learned from and improved upon, right? The old versions of them, to positive nostalgic memories. It reminds me of the Axe body spray commercials where they tell you that the strongest sense tied to memory is the sense of smell, right? So that if you smell good, I think the idea is you smell good, girls are going to remember you, right? Well, this is the same concept.
It's so funny you should say that, because the first cologne I ever had as a kid was Cool Water. And I got an Uber the other day, and the Uber driver would just like basically doused the whole car in Cool Water, and I was just like, it was the best experience, even though it was like suffocating. I was like, oh yeah, this is like middle school.
Memory is really powerful that way. I recently was traveling and I needed aftershave, and I bought I don't remember what it is, but it's the aftershave I bought. I realized as soon as I put it on, I was like, oh, this is the aftershave I always used to use back when I was in the Army, because the second I applied it to my face, I felt like I had just gotten back from PT and was headed to the chow hall. Like, it was crazy. So, but that you can do the same thing without smell, right? You can take that stuff and you can completely change the way people think about it, because they want to. People want to remember things positively from their youth. They don't want to remember things negatively. It's why everybody's always like, how is it that the greatest generation, the World War II generation, these people who we looked up to so much, how is it that, you know, in the 90s when people started to talk about criminal justice reform, so many of them were resistant to it? Well, because in order for them to, embrace it, they had to say to themselves, oh, you know, the society that we built when we came from the war wasn't necessarily fair to everyone.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing for a person to do. And in the same way, people want to look back on these things. It's why people are like, you can't teach, you know, anything that, you know, tells the real story of American history in school, because they only want to remember things in a positive, nostalgic way. And that's what he and others play into. It's
interesting you say that, because it's not what we're planning to talk about, but it makes me think about how we message those types of things, right? Because I think there are some of our friends on the left who get a little carried away, and they're like basically telling grandpa, hey, you should be ashamed, right? And it's like, you have to be like, hey, there's a lot to be proud of, but one of the things we're proud of is that we're always trying to get better. Obama was the best at this, right? He'd be like, look, like the thing that we can take the most pride in is that each generation improves upon the one before it. And we're proud of the people who come after us for improving on what comes after us. And so I think like that's the language I want the left using more of. And I think when we're at our best using that language, is why Obama was a 2-term president, is because that was his default, was to be like, he's almost like the manager who comes in and gives you the one positive for every delta. He's like, look, America, this is what I love about you. But also here, let's improve this thing. All right, let's get back out there. All right.
I think when you do this kind of thing, there's two things that work. One is that Obama method, which I always thought of as like you're trying to open the door of someone's mind, like, and the only way, the password to open the door is something positive. Right?
Yeah.
You got to start with the positive, then you'll open the door, and now you can put in some constructive criticism, right? That's one way. The other way to do it is to open that door. I think the other potential password to open that door, the key, is to cite your own mistakes or your own misgivings.
Yeah.
So like whenever I talk about how to communicate about this stuff on an individual basis, I always tell people it's really helpful if you can start with where you think you have learned something in the past. So for instance, I use this a lot on issues that I think people are less likely to feel like they really understand, right? And it makes them uncomfortable. So I had somebody ask me recently about, what I thought about the transgender athlete stuff. And, I went through the whole, like, look, I think it's being used politically, it's the other side, all that. I said, but and I exaggerated my own concerns initially a little bit, because I said, look, when I first started learning about all the trans stuff, like, I wasn't sure what I thought. I was pretty uncomfortable. Now, maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit there, but in a one-to-one conversation, if I want that person to not feel judged and to listen to what I'm going to say, it's very helpful if you can assign to yourself some of the feelings they currently have to you in the past, but then not say like, but here's why I'm better than you because I changed, then you say, and here's what happened for me is I met this person, right? And so the key, I think, is if you can bridge that nostalgia to reality through a story as to how you got to that point, and then also through accepting the idea that maybe you used to feel somewhat that way, right? Yeah. I think Obama did that extremely well, for instance, on same-sex marriage. When he decided to make that change, he basically explained to the country, here were the misgivings I had, but here's how I got to the place where I am now. And I always talk about this as just like show your math. But if you do that, people are a lot more likely to go with you.
Well, this is kind of related, but there was this Wall Street Journal article I wanted to get your take on, Jason. And it talks about this poll that they conducted that basically finds that we're moving away from some previously, I wouldn't say sacred values, because some of these are not necessarily sacred, but they're things that I think were almost indelible to America. Patriotism, religious faith, having children, right? So this data is, I'll give you some of the top lines here. 38% of respondents said patriotism was very important to them, and 39% said religion was very important. And that was down sharply from when the Journal first asked this question in 1998, when 70% deemed patriotism to be very important, and 62% said the same religion. The share of Americans who say having children and involvement in their community and hard work are very important values to them have also fallen. Tolerance for others has fallen. The only thing, Jason, that has gone up is people's feelings about money. We really love our money in America. That went up from 1998. So basically, we're becoming more materialistic, more selfish potentially, and we're becoming less we're buying less into any of these shared values. Now, I don't think you have to love all those shared values, but it doesn't seem like we're replacing some of these old collective values with new ones. We're just becoming more individualistic.
Yeah, when I first read this, my instinct, being kind of an optimist, was to try and find a way to like distinguish it, like a law fact pattern, and say like, oh well, patriotism. Now that word has been taken and it kind of means something different than it did, but the percentages are so stark, and the money thing as sort of the cherry on top. Man, it is just a depressing survey, and not because like. it's super important that people are religious or anything. It's not that so much as what it points to me is that, and you and I've talked about this a lot, is the loss of some sense of a national identity.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I say that, I think people hear it incorrectly, or they hear my words differently than what I mean, because I don't mean homogeneity. I don't mean that we all have to say things the same or believe things the same or look the same. I don't mean any of that at all. I'm very much a proponent of diversity and multiculturalism, but I do think and talk a lot about the fact that this is the longest consecutive period in American history without some form of mandatory service, combined with the fact that with the diffusion of technology and media platforms, you no longer have the experience of experiencing the news the same way other people do, or having, a good chance that when you get into work the next day, 1 in 3 chance that people watch the same thing on television as you did last night. So it is, when I see those numbers, it makes me very concerned, because it makes me think about us becoming more and more isolated from one another and losing a sense of community.
Yeah, and this is on top of a lot of data we've discussed on this podcast, including, people spending more time alone, people investing less in institutions, the partisanship and polarization driving people apart as well. People less likely to rub elbows with people who are different than them. And it's really startling. And the money thing makes me think about, like, you and I think are both technically millennials, but I think like some of us older millennials are more culturally Gen X. Like the music we listen to, the movies we watched are more of Gen X than millennials. Mm-hmm. And Gen X had this obsession with not being a sellout. Mm-hmm. That is no longer a cultural phenomenon anymore. Now we are very pro selling out, all generations. We're like, got to monetize that. You got like, right. From post on Instagram.
We
have
we are literally,
greens. Yeah,
we're literally talking to each other on a YouTube show that we had as a podcast. Yeah. And now we're like, let's also have a YouTube show. That's the game.
I wonder if I don't know, because capitalism is a powerful thing. And even the people who are against selling out were selling out. Like Rage Against the Machine still had to sign a record deal. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, but it makes me wonder.
I heard an Eminem song and sing too.
Yeah, So, so it's probably overblown how much that cultural phenomenon really yielded any results. But it does. I think a healthy dose of conversation around selling out could matter, because like if in my group of friends in New York, right? If somebody's like, this hasn't happened, but like, let's pretend somebody's like, I just started this company, I'm selling it, and like the Saudis bought my company. Mm-hmm. There would be like a conversation, and then people would move on. Whereas I think like, and to be clear, this has not happened, but like, there should be a thing that happens where you're like, yeah, that's actually really bad, and like, let's talk about that. Like here, like maybe we should examine this, like there's things like that happen that like people are just like, yeah, money is money. We don't really care about where it comes from anymore or what choices we make. Like you and I both have colleagues in politics who've gone on to work for the very companies doing the very things that we stood against, like tons of them, like most of the Democratic communications establishment.
Yeah.
Like Jay Carney went to go work for Amazon, like, but nobody really cares. That's the thing. Is like this is a value,
Okay, now let me give you a counter, a different way to think about this part of this survey. One, I still do believe that generationally, millennials and Generation Z have a greater interest in trying to make the world a better place and trying to feel like they're a part of doing that. And I think that does still bear itself out in surveys about like where people want to go work or what sort of products they want to buy. It's why you see so many corporations having to do so much brand image marketing. So that would be a piece of evidence that would go against the idea that money is the only thing that matters to people. And then to layer on top of that, what I would suggest is that it is entirely possible that the reason that more and more people are saying that they are concerned about money than did in the past is because in 1998, people had less reason to be concerned about money because the economy was booming. Yeah. And today,
college was more affordable.
college was more affordable then, everything. And now with, millennials who, particularly the millennials who, like graduated school in '08, and have been through a period where like they couldn't work. Many of them still can't buy a house, even though they've got good jobs. So I would, just because I really want to inject some optimism into this episode, I would say that to me is a mitigating factor as to why people would be more concerned about money now, is because it's harder to come by, or at least harder to make enough to get by than it was, 25 years ago.
Right. Well, I hate how depressing this episode has been, but we've got, this is not good news for the people involved, but certainly the kind of thing that we love to see, which is Fox News continues to be, kind of twisting itself into a pretzel over this Dominion lawsuit. And they wound up firing a producer who last week accused the network of discrimination and of coercing her into providing misleading testimony in a defamation case. This is the Dominion defamation case. And this person has a lot to say, including that basically she and Maria Bartiromo somehow were being set up to take the fall for Fox, is the claim. Really curious about that claim. But you're a lawyer. I was going to ask you, just like, this feels like a huge deal if a person in your company is accusing the company of coercing false testimony. That would seem interesting for two reasons. One is that it seems illegal, not just from a, like, I'm going to civilly sue you, but it should be criminally illegal. So I was going to ask you about that. And two is, would this not open up a lot of the legal correspondence now that would otherwise be privileged?
Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah, because the one thing that is never privileged, right, is anything that is in furtherance of breaking the law. Yeah. So if it is in furtherance of breaking the law, which urging someone to commit perjury would be in furtherance of breaking the law, it would pierce the veil of that immunity that the lawyers would have. That's a really good point. I also think it's yet another thing that seems very bad for them in the Dominion lawsuit, because what this essentially is it's also somebody really recanting what was apparently helpful testimony to Fox News,
right?
In that lawsuit. I watched. Have you ever actually watched the movie Bombshell?
No, I can't get through it.
That's what I thought too. And
I started it. I think it was in 10 minutes. I was like, and I love Charlize Theron. She's one of my favorite actresses.
She was amazing in it, yeah. And no matter what you may think of Megyn Kelly, listeners, I have been interviewed by Megyn Kelly a few times, and wouldn't say like I know her, but I've had conversations with her. And I will tell you, it's really interesting, by the way, when you know someone, this is a sidebar, but like when you know someone personally who you see portrayed, and you can see that they're portrayed in their public persona very well, but then when you're like, oh wow, they got their private persona too, which is surely, that is an amazing portrayal of Megyn Kelly, like incredible. Like there's parts of that movie where you're like, is that her or is that? Anyway, that said, I watched that movie on the plane back from Miami the other day, and like this really reminded me of like the environment at Fox News and how well I think they nailed just what it was like there, not just from, how obviously terrible it was for women, which is really what, and is what the movie was about, but also just like how everything was driven toward, there's a great line in the movie that Kate McKinnon's character says, where she says, she's explaining to Margot Robbie how to think about pitching a story as a producer for Fox. She's like, look, either a story scares grandma or it makes grandpa mad. If it's either of those, it's a Fox story. If it's not a Fox story. And I've been thinking about that now a lot in reference to everything having to do with Fox and right-wing media. And so, man, I do think that this lawsuit is causing them enormous problems. And I think that this is going to cause them yet another one.
Mm. Yeah, that's basically all I had on this one. I just wanted to mention it's good to break up the sort of the sea of depression in today's episode. I promise next week, listeners, I promise we'll be more positive. Maybe the world will yield us something positive to talk about next week. But speaking of the positive, Jason, you have a wonderful wife who has written a book.
Before I get into that, we'll do grab an oar real quick. which is, I would say, just going back to our initial discussion, I mentioned that I'm on the board of Giffords, which is the organization that fights for gun safety that was founded by Gabby Giffords. People can go to giffords.org. You can donate. There are a lot of ways to get involved. There's an entire page about the gun maker immunity stuff and how you can get involved in that and what's actually being done at the state level to try and mitigate some of that. So I would encourage people to go to giffords.org. But yes, going to One for Us, I am going to shamelessly plug my wife's book, which comes out today. We're talking right now. It's Tuesday. It came out today. It's called Go Big or Go Home. Subtitle is 5 Ways to Create a Customer Experience That Will Close the Deal. Diana has written now 3 books. This is my favorite. They're all good. It is really fantastic. This is a book for anybody who, and this fits in well with the theme of this show, who aims to persuade anyone of anything. I mean, the book is made most of all for people who make pitches in business and sell things. But if you're trying to sell a political idea, if you're trying to persuade anybody of anything, it's a short book. It is like this awesome collection of some of the greatest sales and pitch stories of all time, how some products that you use all the time, how they actually got pitched in the first place. And I'm very proud of her. It's called Go Big or Go Home. She actually, because she wants as many people to read it as possible, it is actually available this week on Amazon for 99 cents. So, for 1 week only, you can get this book for 99 cents, I think the digital copy, but you can order the hardcover too. So it's Go Big or Go Home. It's by Diana Kander. People should go get it. That's my One for Us. Kind of a shameless plug, but that's all right.
Highly recommend. And she sent me a video last night about reading the book because I usually read everything that your family does ahead of time.
It's a lot to keep up with.
This is the one I didn't get around to, but I picked it up this morning and I read it over breakfast, like half the book. It's like such a page turner. It's awesome. She's a great writer. Such a family of writers.
Yeah, but thank you. It is a lot to keep up with all the content that we produce. Like, I think for our parents, it's just a lot. But anyway, they're listening to this right now, so yeah, I'm sure.
Well, shout out to her. Welcome back from Miami.
Thanks.
Did you get a tan? I can't tell.
Yeah, this is me with a tan.
This is you with a tan.
Yeah, I did. I got a tan. I got burnt. I got my son. Meanwhile, who is half me and half olive skinned Diana, is just brown. So it's pretty funny.
Good.
But you got some travel coming. You're in Atlanta now.
I'm in Atlanta right now. Yeah, and I'm over here. You can't see behind me, but I'm in the corner of the hood. I love these corners, and I can see like all of downtown Atlanta from here. I love Atlanta. Maybe we should do a live show here one day. I feel like this is a city that's grown on me over time. Like, it's really cool. A lot of energy here. Like, I feel like they've done well.
And then you go to Costa Rica soon.
Costa Rica next week for celebrating early my 40th birthday. My 40th is until the end of April, but I wanted to get out there before the waves get too big, although I was looking at the surf forecast, and they're very big when I get down there. So this may be the last you ever hear from me.
How many people took you up on this destination birthday? I wish that we had been able to. That's pretty good.
16, yeah.
That's
so
pretty
most
good.
people I emailed, I think. Yeah, so I'm glad people were able to do that.
Pretty much just us that didn't.
Well, I figured given I haven't given people a destination wedding yet, I figure I've got one ask right now.
That may be coming.
Well use it. Yeah.
When that happens. Not to put you on the spot.
Put me on the spot.
When that happens, I promise we will make a greater effort than we did for your 40th birthday.
All right, great. Well, I'll see you in Bali. No, I'm kidding. I don't know what
that sounds amazing.
All
right. Okay. This has been fun. Remember to subscribe to Majority 54 wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Just search Majority 54. Please leave us a 5-star review. Thank you to the Meidas Mighty for listening. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.